Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Welcome back, folks. Well, it's good to see you guys all again here. So this next episode, I've been really wanting to do for a bit, and I had a few, viewer requests, and so I started to do that and get those done, and trust me, I'm still not done. Plus, there's some different episodes that I like to do here and there, so, between the viewer requests, I just add a couple in that I wanted to get done. So, I hope you guys all enjoyed your little holiday there, and you guys have all been wicked supportive, so I really appreciate that with likes and follows and all that shit, so thank you very much for that. So my next little tale here, this one comes from back home in Cape Breton Island. Now, this all happened at a place called Sydney River, Nova Scotia, on May 7th, 1992. Now, this all happened at a McDonald's restaurant, originally on Kings Road in the shopping district area. Now, if I remember correctly here, I didn't want to, I couldn't figure this out, so I had to ask somebody here to, it was actually like a Low Foods grocery stores up around that way. So it was McDonald's, your grocery stores, Pizza Den was up that way too, I believe. It's been a while since I've been home, so this story involves three perpetrators. There's one, Freeman Daniel McNeil. He was 23 years old. Darren Muse, 18. And Derek Wood, also 18 when the crime occurred. Now, Freeman McNeil, he was from Sydney, Nova Scotia, and he was the youngest of the family. He was raised by his mother and sisters mostly because his dad had committed suicide at a young age. And, over the course of his life, that's gotta take its toll. His dad was an alcoholic. He would often fight with his mom, so not the best memories of, family life growing up. And all that emotional baggage, that would definitely be hell to carry around with you. And who knows, maybe Freeman's self-esteem took a fucking nosedive at some point. But, that didn't stop him from living his life or anything. Because he did go to high school. He hung out with his friends, and he actually graduated from Riverview Rural High School. Now, over time, he also attended the Nova Scotia's Teachers College for a period of 1 year. Over the next little bit, Freeman would work at Malcolm Monroe Junior High School as a student teacher. He was very well liked by students and staff there at his time at that school. And after that, he started working as a private security guard in the Sydney and Halifax areas. So, that's not too bad to drive back and forth. To drive from Sydney to Halifax is 5 hours. So, that's totally doable. Now, next, we'll talk about Derek Wood. Now, some deem this guy to be the mastermind behind the robbery. Now, growing up, Derek did have a normal childhood, and he lived in the Whitney Pier area. So, he did normal things that we did, hung out with friends, went to school, whatever, right? But some of his friends, they kind of thought he was a little bit awkward, but he got along with everybody nonetheless. Now, at a young age, his parents ended up splitting up, and his mom moved away to British Columbia. Then his dad actually stayed behind to support them, and he had a job at the Sobeys grocery store. While in school, Derek mostly kept to himself, and the odd time, he would be the subject of bullies. He was just awkward and whatnot, right? But that's every school you go to, and, people get picked on. And bullies actually, to me, they want to make people feel small so they can make themselves feel big kind of thing, right? And to those kind of people, I just say, fuck off. Nobody needs that shit. Now, Derek, he didn't graduate from Riverview High School like his buddy Freeman. he was a high school dropout at 18 years old. And even his co-workers there, they remember him as a nice guy, but just socially awkward. And like most kids after high school, they usually just sit back and make plans of what to do afterwards. But Derek really didn't have any plans, and without a high school diploma, there wasn't really much job offers gonna be flying his way, right? And next, the last of the Three Stooges is Darren Muse. Now, unlike Freeman and Derek, Muse actually came from a loving home. He had four older brothers that kind of guided him through his life. And even though he dropped out of Riverview, his parents actually showed a little bit of support just in hopes that he would someday return and finish high school. Now, he was a very popular guy. I mean, all of his friends recall he kind of like craved attention and he did things just to show off. And that's just a little background on these three guys before we get into some more details about their upcoming crimes. Now, Derek, he was on shift there one day, and a conveyor belt had malfunctioned, broke down, so he got the job of going down to check on it. So he went down to the basement, and it was here where he discovered a rarely used basement door. And a little bit around that area, it was there he would find the company-owned safe that was used for the daily deposits. It was around this time where he kind of thought to himself, like, hey, that door would be an easy access point to the restaurant, and it's really close to the safe. So the wheels started to turn up in his brain of how he can think of a plan to rob the McDonald's. But, like, was this too much of a feat to do alone? He would probably need some help with this, so, he had a little chat with Freeman and Muse. Now, he wanted to ballpark some ideas back and forth, but however, it always went back to the money. Like, how much is in the safe? What would that be split 3 ways? Could they pull this off? There's always questions. Would it be an in and out kind of thing? But, even what would they do with the employees on shift? These were all good questions here. I'm just trying to give you guys some answers for them. Now, they started to devise a plan here, so it seemed simple enough. Derek would prop open the back door with a school bag. He let the others in, he'd round up the employees, grab the money, and then they'd all dip. Now, it would be an easy score. Busy as that McDonald's was, there was sure to be a big haul in there. You could split that between 3 people, right? But, you gotta think of other things too, like the bank deposits, like every couple hours or whatever, or the beginning of the shift, the end of the shift, things like that. Now, Wood believed that there was a substantial amount of money in that safe that ranged from $80,000 to $200,000. That's a lot of cabbage, folks, especially for a McDonald's in Sydney River. And that's a community with about, 455 people? I went to school in that town. It wasn't the most fun times of my growing up, but it had everything you need. Pizza shops, burger joints, banks, grocery stores, everything, right? Now, the McDonald's wouldn't have that much money of that amount, but, the town actually, it's surrounded by a bunch of other ones, so that all coming in to go to McDonald's and whatnot, I could see how they would think it would be that amount. And, yeah, like Sydney River, like that town actually, it was developed into a suburb back in the 60s and 70s there, too. I did mention the surrounding areas there too, that would have been like Sydney, North Sydney, Glace Bay, and Cox Heath. So Sydney has a population of something like 30,000. North Sydney is like 9,000 or a little over. Glace Bay is almost 17,000. And Cox Heath is a little over 2,300. So the possibility of that safe containing that much could be possible. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, this little robbery plan that they were orchestrating, this would get them rich quick. And the economy back home, much like now, wasn't all the best. Healthcare back there, that's a big thing. Plus, its natural resources. There's iron in Newfoundland, gypsum salt in Nova Scotia, and also, fossil fuels like coal. And, even off Newfoundland, there's oil. And Nova Scotia, the gas sector. So, but besides that, unless your family member, like, actually knows someone that's high up in a job or whatever, that's the only way that you pretty much get on. Or, like, unless you went to college or whatever, too. But, like, those three guys, like, they weren't all that fucking bright. Freeman, though, I mean, maybe, because he possibly could open up some doors with his, schooling and whatnot, right? Like, his teaching experience and shit could probably pave the way for his future. But here he is planning a robbery with, like, two fucking idiots, so good for him. Maybe he could have been a coal miner or something, right? I mean, lots of my buddies work those jobs. Some are still here, some aren't, but that's life. And even coal, like, that's a major thing back in Cape Breton, but McDonald's seemed to be the sufficient enough for Derek and the boys, so, I mean, steady paycheck. Not like it's seasonal work back home or anything like that. That also sucks, by the way, but the job at McDonald's suited him, I guess, just until he could figure out what he wanted to do, and what he wanted to do was rob the McDonald's, so eventually the three got planned in that robbery. But it was mainly through the winter months there. They were trying to get their wits about them. They just wanted to make sure, like, they had a foolproof plan where nothing could go wrong, or possibly go wrong. There is no thing as the perfect plan, because sometimes plans don't always go according to plan. The original date that they had planned for this robbery was actually April 30th, 1992. But the three men were all up in the air about possibly needing a fourth person, because they wanted this fourth person to cover the door, so that way, when they entered the basement, that nobody would be able to escape or run for help. But the fourth person there that they wanted to recruit, it didn't pan out. So they kept on thinking on how to kind of pull this off in the meantime. So they were thinking up different plots and scenarios. Now, who would drive the getaway car? Who would round up the employees? And if they should bring any weapons to use or whatever. They just wanted to make sure everybody knew that they meant business. But they wouldn't use the weapons. They just wanted to scare people, get the money, and be in and out of there. Now, very rarely with robberies, like I said, do they ever go as planned. But unless you're just straight up like a professional criminal, which these three were not professional fucking criminals. They were just fresh out of high school. I mean, 2 out of 3 didn't even finish school. But here they are planning a robbery. So now Freeman, he thought he ended up getting a fourth accomplice all lined up, but the person he asked was smart enough to decline their offer. And these guys decided it would just be easy enough to do it with just the 3 of them. So they try to pull off the heist and not have to postpone or, like, keep fucking around with trying to find more help for it, right? Now, even though, like, the 3 had went to school with one another too, it was pretty much just Derek and Darren Muse that actually knew each other a little bit more. Darren and Freeman, though, like, they had mostly just seen each other around at coffee shops and from other spots around town on the weekends, like pool halls and stuff, but over time they ended up hanging around full time, just quite a bit. With everything all planned out now, the 3 would now carry out this plan on May 7th, 1992. Now, Derek Wood will be on McDonald's shift this night. Now, he ended up working with his co-workers, and they kind of noticed that he kept looking at the time. They thought that was kind of odd. Now, the co-workers on shift were Donna Warren, Neil Burrows, Jimmy Fagan, and Arlene McNeil. Now, Donna was 22. She was a shift manager on duty that night, and people recall her as like a very hard worker. She was actually saving up to pay tuition for law school up in Halifax. She was a 2-time graduate from Memorial High School, and the second time around, she did a radio and TV program. Now, she wanted to put work into this so she could use those communication skills in the courtroom, because she was planning on being a defense lawyer. And then there was Jimmy Fagan. He was 27 years old, and he was doing some maintenance work around McDonald's. He was a full-timer, and he covered a lot of shifts. Everybody loved that guy. Very well liked. And he also had, like, plans on moving away from McDonald's there. He was planning on going to help his brother with some landscaping work there, because sometimes they would do that seasonally. Then he would go back to McDonald's. Because he was a good worker. He'd come back. And Arlene McNeil, She was a cashier on shift that night. She was 20 years old at the time. She was a graduate of Memorial High, and she also had plans on doing business administration. She was saving up to do just that. So she was just another person trying to save up and get out of there, right? She was very vibrant, and she was known for her positive outlook. Now, she also had an extended family for being just an only child. She had lots of aunts and uncles, cousins, and everybody there in the whole family was pretty tight-knit. And next was Neil Burrows. He was a 29-year-old man. Great guy. And some of my friends actually knew him, and a buddy of mine is related to him. They're very distant cousins. Now, this guy was a straight shooter, a family man. He had a wife named Julia, a little fella named Justin, and he worked there to make a living for himself and his family. And proper thing, it's what anybody should do. And little known fact, Neil had worked a different shift than the one he worked that night. His usual shift was 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. But he switched shifts with a coworker, and he ended up working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. And Neil ended up working that night of the robbery. But in reality, like, who would have known about the doings that were going to transpire that night on that shift? And some of the stuff that I thumbed through here, like the last few days here, the night of the robbery, Donna Warren, she was the shift manager, so she was in the office sorting out the cash and checking the float count and whatnot. And then that was going to go directly into the safe. Now, Arlene, the shift's cashier, she was clocked out at the time because she was waiting for Donna to finish her shift because they always just leave together. Now, Derek, he was helping the staff, and in between all that, he found time to prop the school bag between the door. So now the basement door was open so that Freeman and Muse could now gain access later on. So after that, Derek had left his shift, and then the crew were finishing up some stuff for the morning crew and whatnot, so they just continued on work as usual. To prepare for the upcoming robbery, Freeman and Muse put on a second layer of clothing just so they could discard the top layer in case there were any descriptions of the three men and what they had been wearing. Now, the plan that all three went by was to enter through the prop door. McNeil would stop the employees from leaving. Muse guarded the kitchen area, and he would rob the safe, and if anybody tried to run, they would go beat them unconscious. So later on, the three parked on a nearby dirt road and walked to the restaurant. They brought weapons with them just as like a scare tactic, or for leverage just to get in and out. Now, Derek Wood had a .22 caliber pistol, Muse had a pair of knives, and Freeman had a shovel and some rope. So once they entered through the basement door, they encountered Donna and Arlene, and both had recognized Derek right away, like right off the fucking bat. So they were kind of confused and thinking, this might be a joke or something, because everybody just seen him leave his shift, and now he was back. Now, Donna kind of nervously kind of laughed, like, is this a joke or what? And to this, Derek shot Arlene right in the face. So I guess the whole, we'll just scare them a little bit option is now out the fucking window, right? So Muse had then told Donna not to move, and Arlene fell to the floor. So Donna, completely distraught, seeing Arlene lay there in a pool of blood, she tried to keep it together best she could. Now, Arlene was still breathing, but barely. Now, Wood and Muse ended up going upstairs, and they headed to the main part of the restaurant. And up there would be Neil Burrows, and he hadn't heard anything that was going on downstairs, because he was up around the sink area, cleaning up and doing everything with his equipment. And he was just sort of bent down on his knees down by the sink area. Now, Derek Wood ended up seeing him, and he shot Burrows from behind, right in the back of the head. But this didn't stop Neil. He was actually more confused than anything. He had no idea what the fuck just happened. So he cried out for help, and then he was scrambling to get up, because fuck, all that shock of just getting shot in the head, right? Not knowing what the fuck's going on. I mean, that's crazy. Now, Darren Muse then attacked Neil and stabbed him in the neck with the knife that he had. And then he cut his throat. But this also didn't kill him. And, like, this guy fought to survive. Like, Freeman McNeil went over to Neil and then brutally beat him with the shovel. And then Neil still ended up crying out for help after numerous blows to the fucking head. The boys were actually getting kind of frustrated with this now, because the guy wouldn't die. So Derek Wood took the .22, and he shot Neil 2 more times from close range. So close range meaning from a very short distance. And he killed the family man from Dominion. Now, the men after this forced Donna to open up the safe to grab their big score, and then they get the fuck out of there. So once the safe had been opened up, Derek Wood quickly shot Donna in the back of the head. He gathered up all the cash, and they were going to peace out. Now, the crew definitely didn't get what they expected. There was nowhere near 200 grand totaled in that safe. The grand fucking total was $2,017. So all that bullshit, all these victims, for that fucking piddly ass amount. And even like with one of the two graduating in high school, I mean, those other guys could have went back. They could have did something with their lives, but here they are robbing fucking McDonald's, right? So all this happened around 1 a.m. So as they were gonna go leave, another employee was pulling up to the McDonald's parking lot in a cab for his shift. Now that man was Jimmy Fagan. So he got dropped off in a cab that was driven by one Daniel McVicker. Now, Jimmy was riding in the back of the cab. So Jimmy was the kind of fucking guy that would just pop by an hour early just to shoot the shit, just to talk to the staff and help out whatever, right? Really fucking nice guy. So he talked to the workers coming on shift and talked to the ones coming off shift. So we got picked up from Charlotte Street up by Smooth Herman's Bar. And this is up on the Esplanade there. It's just a little ways up the road from Sydney River. It's like an 8-minute drive, if that, if you're over by Herman's anyway. It's like a 5.8 kilometer distance. I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of detail, I guess. And Smooth Herman's, like, great little spot, wicked little bar. And it was open back in the day. It's actually closed now. And I spent a few years there one day, so it was good times and bad times. But always packed, great little spot. And it also had like this little food cart guy outside. He always sold sausages, so he always made a fucking killing. Like he was always there. And if you were lucky, you'd actually see somebody get punched in the face too, so good times. The cabbie McVicker that had dropped Jimmy off, he spun the cab around to leave. Now Jimmy headed over to the employee entrance to buzz himself in. Now this was the only door that staff was allowed to go through, after hours. Now Jimmy stood there a second, waiting for his buddy to open up the door, or any of the other guys on shift, like Arlene or Donna or whatever. But it wasn't any of them that came through the door. The 3 boys ended up rushing out the door, and seeing Jimmy standing there kind of got them startled a little bit. Now seeing Derek, and a little confused as to why they were rushing out, he said, "Hey guys," and Darren Muse yelled, "Shoot him," and Freeman shot poor Jimmy right then and there. Now the cab driver that just had started on down the parking lot here, he heard the gunshot, and he said it was like a little firecracker going off, which is what he thought it was, until he looked back, and he seen the passenger that he just dropped off fall to the ground, and some men run out, gun booting her, with a bag in their hands. The cab driver did what anybody else would. He radioed dispatch, and then he told them what just happened to his fare. So they told him to keep going, and the dispatcher got a hold of police at 1:07 a.m. Now another cab heard all this shit on the radio, so he came over to assist with all this. Now his name was John McGinnis. Now McGinnis recalls that when he pulled up into the parking lot, a brown Chevy Impala had fucking flew past at high speed. Now they ran up to Jimmy, and they seen the bullet wound to his head, and he was pretty much just clinging to life from there on out. Now they radioed dispatch to send in an ambulance in a hurry, because this guy's gonna fucking die. Now during this time, the boys would ditch some evidence. Now Freeman disposed of the bloody shovel. One thing had also crossed his mind. Where was his school bag at? And now in all the commotion, this little prick forgot to grab it from between the door of the restaurant. So the back door was still propped open with his fucking school bag from school. So, smart lads. So, Anybody that showed up on the crime scene now would be able to fucking find that. So they decided to double back and then go grab it from the door. But they noticed the cabs circling around the area here. Now, Derek hopped out to try to establish some sort of fucking alibi or something. So he ran into the local King's Convenience. Now, this is what it was called back then. It might be something different now. I haven't been home in a while. Now, it might be under a different name or anything. So Derek ended up calling cops from there. And he said he had been at the shootings. He gave them some bullshit story about why the bag was there. And then the officer took his name and number, and also his home address. And then Derek ended up giving him that without any hesitation. And then the police officer told Derek to go home. So after seeing the body of Jimmy, the cab drivers went into McDonald's to check on everybody. They found Donna Warren and Neil Burrows in the kitchen on the main floor. So, a sergeant by the name of Cleary was the lead investigator on this case. He was the first responding officer to show up. Now, for fear that the killers could still be inside the restaurant, the cab drivers kind of hung back and let police do their thing when they rolled up. Now, after seeing the body of Jimmy, Cleary pulled out his weapon out of his holster, and he was ready to go into the restaurant alone. But at quick glance, he noticed a patrol car pulling up, so they went in as a team. Now, the policeman that went with him was Henry Jansen. So he found Arlene in a pool of blood, but still breathing and barely alive. Now, Cleary checked out the kitchen area, finding Neil dead with no pulse, and he checked the office, and he found Donna dead with a bullet hole to her head and her right eye. So when ambulances arrived, the cab drivers helped the paramedics load up Jimmy and Arlene, because both had still been breathing, and they were rushed to the hospital. Now, while investigating the crime, Cleary had gotten news of a phone call about Derek Woods. Now, he said he was at the shooting. So now Derek would actually try to play his part off as a victim of this botched robbery. Now, the policeman that spoke to Derek at the King's Convenience store, he told him to go home, but they would interview him later on. Now, Darren Muse and Freeman there, they ended up leaving in the getaway car to go ditch some of the evidence that they used in the robbery. So they ended up at Grant Meyer Brook. Now this is a brook's a body of water that leads to a lower level in a channel on land. And then the brook sort of trails off to nearby villages. But the villages that were around the North Sydney area here were the brooks from Northwest Arm and Balls Creek. Now in the brook, they tossed in the cash box, the McDonald's certificates, and other papers from the safe. Now, Freeman went on either side of the road, and he disposed of the knives, kind of like under cover of a culvert. Now, they then drove to North Sydney, and they threw the bloody clothes in Sydney Harbour. Now, North Sydney is about it's about a 13-minute drive from where they committed the crimes, so it's about a 17-kilometer distance. Now, everything was disposed of from the crime, and now the boys were scot-free from any involvement in the crime, right? So Darren got dropped off at a convenience store because he had forgotten his keys, so he decided to play the VLTs until his dad woke up. Now, VLTs mean Video Lottery Terminal. So that's like an electric gambling machine or whatever. You see them at the bars. You probably all played them. I've played them. Everybody has. So these are located at licensed establishments. So he began spending some of the robbery money. Now, while Freeman, he drove off to spend the night with his girlfriend. And Derek, well, instead of going home, and avoiding cops at all costs, because, the guy just committed a murder and robbery and all that, he headed back to the McDonald's area. And by this time, the cops in the area had shit on complete fucking lockdown. So police had roadblocks all set up now, just to check passerby vehicles, to find the ones responsible for this crime. Now, Derek, stupid as he was, he went back to one of these roadblocks. So he kind of announced who he was, said he was at the crime, and he escaped danger, and he called police right away. And after all these horrible crimes, this guy just tried to make himself look out to be like some sort of fucking hero, right? Just doing the right thing here, letting you guys know about the robbery, and that kind of sealed his fate right there because he was taken in for questioning by police. Attaboy. So, police now had Derek Wood, that already had given verbal statements to police about the robbery, in for questioning. So, even Wood himself signed a written statement as a material witness in the matter. Now, the first contact that he had with police was the phone call from King's Convenience. And then he identified himself as Derek Wood. Now, this was to police officer Stan Jesty. Now, he had been on the phone, and this phone call had been sound recorded. Now, according to a 24-hour monitoring system, this was time-stamped at 1:21 a.m. to 1:23 a.m. So he told police that he was standing outside of McDick's having a cigarette when he heard a huge bang. He then gave the destination that he was placing the phone call from, which was King's Convenience Store on Kings Road, Sydney River. Now, Jesty, during this phone call with Derek, began to get overwhelmed with phone calls pouring in about the shooting. So he kind of just got Derek's info, and he said, hey, we'll be in touch. And that was it. Now, the next encounter that Derek had with police was between the hours of 3:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., because he approached a constable named John McLeod of the Sydney River Police Department. Now, this was at a roadblock intersection, so he told him that he'd run away from the restaurant after hearing the gunfire. So, when he made that phone call, that actually got back to Corporal Brian Stoyak. So he was looking for the one that made the call, and then he told McCleary about the call. So he went to the roadblock and met up with Derek. Now, after this, Derek got into the police car with the police officer, and then both were on the way back to McDonald's. So upon arriving, Derek stayed in the car, and Stoyak had a conversation with Kevin Cleary. Now, there was a few other officers there that stood around and tried to piece things together. Now, when Stoyak went back to get Derek, Derek told him that after the shooting, that he ended up by the Sydney River Bridge, and then back to the store, and then he phoned police, but he didn't remember the exact route that he took. So, at 4:45 a.m., police then put Derek into the interview room. Now, this was at the police station in Sydney. Now, this room was like standard room, table, chair, one-way window, telephone. And the telephone actually had to be removed from the room because Derek used it without permission. Now, when Derek was asked about the route that he took to from McDonald's to Sydney there, he said he couldn't remember the route. Now, to which Stoyak kind of had his doubts about this, but he literally had no other reason other than to believe that he wasn't involved in the crime. I mean, he gave no reason behind it or whatever, right? Like, he didn't give off that vibe. But back at the crime scene, police were still investigating the scene, and paramedics had taken both Jimmy and Arlene back to the hospital, but they were still pretty bad shape. Arlene McNeil was still in the hospital, so over time she survived the incident, but she was left, she suffered permanent mental and physical disabilities that pretty much carried on with her for the rest of her life. Now, police found that the victims of this scene here, the brutality of it all, it was mentioned that it kind of looked like they weren't even given a chance. They did not fight back. There's no evidence that they even did. So these were just straight execution-style killings. Now, with Derek Wood still back at the station there, the constables questioned him about his whereabouts and everything, and they noticed that he had a cut on his hand. Now, Woods told him that the cut was from opening up a can a few days ago. But the thing is, though, the officer realized, hey, this is fresh blood. I know what that looks like. And he didn't let on that he knew about that. Now, Stoyak continued to grill him, so he questioned him pretty fucking hard about his whereabouts and his activity the night of the robbery. Now, a little known fact here, the questions and answers that Derek was giving the Corporal Stoyak, these were being investigated by Corporal Cleary when he was checking on all Buddy's answers there at the crime scene, just seeing if they matched up or whatever, right? So, now both officers were finding inconsistencies in Derek's story. So at the same time, when police went through all his inconsistencies and stuff, it was now time to charge him. but he didn't know about this. He thought he was just getting into there, getting in, being questioned, and getting out of there. So Stoyak ended up telling Derek that he was now being charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Also, he threw in the armed robbery. So he was then advised of his fucking charter rights. So now it was his choice to ask for counsel and legal aid. But at this time he declined. But then he began to answer some question here that he was asked by Cleary and Stoyak. So then he decided, hey, maybe I should call my lawyer. They questioned Derek a little bit more, and then they asked him if he wanted to consult his lawyer. So they gave him some time to think about that, and then they left him in the room alone, just to gather his thoughts and whatnot. So he called his lawyer around 2 p.m. Now, after this call with his lawyer, the telephone was again removed from the room. Now, his lawyer attended the detachment, and he spoke with Derek in private, and then he dipped out at 2:48 p.m. Now, the police re-entered the room at 2:55 p.m., and then they resumed questioning with Derek until 6:20 p.m. No new info was gained during that duration. He then asked to consult with his lawyer, Mr. Mullen, and then he returned and spoke with him in private yet again from 6:59 p.m. to 8:37 p.m. The lawyer then told police before leaving that the accused did not want to give a police statement. So 8:46 p.m., the 2 corporal officers re-entered, they questioned him some more, and at 9:05, Cleary left the room. Now when 10:30 rolled around, Derek gave Stoyak a second version of events. Now, Derek now said that he entered the McDonald's when he heard the shooting. He didn't leave like he originally stated. And then he saw Arlene on the floor, and then 2 men running upstairs. Now, he followed them outside before realizing the danger of following 2 men with a gun. So, he kind of dipped back, and then he went to Sydney River Bridge, and then to King's Convenience. And this tale of events ended around 11:10 p.m., and although no written statement was ever signed by Woods on this, Stoyak actually took notes of the convo, and he was just trying to keep up with all the version of events to see what was consistent and what was inconsistent with the first version. Stoyak ended up leaving the room there for a little bit, and when he returned at 4:03 a.m., he found Woods asleep on the floor. So he awoke, and then they continued on with the interview until 5:48 a.m. Now, Derek said, that's it. That's all I know. I know nothing more about what happened. And there were a couple things that kind of made police look at his character, like, even during the course of all this, like, both before and after his arrest. Woods never once asked to leave the station. And even upon talking to him, Stoyak said that he was calm, cooperative, and he gave no indication that he wanted to leave or disregard the company of the police at any time. And he didn't, ask them to stop questioning him at any time either. So, it was just crazy interrogation, I guess, and some 12 hours after the murders, Derek Woods was under arrest. It didn't take police long to figure out that Woods and Freeman knew each other, so, Derek ended up calling Freeman the very second that he hung up the phone with police at the 24-hour convenience store. And even, before Freeman and Muse were brought in for questioning, people were talking about how much money the two were spending there, so where'd that money come from, right? The robbery just happened. People were putting 2 and 2 together. So police decided to go question Freeman McNeil. And police, at this time, they did know about Freeman because of Derek and the phone call and whatnot. The cops were definitely on top of their shit with this case. There was Constable G.J. Lamb. He was looking into some tips there, so he decided to go see Freeman's girlfriend, Michelle Sharp, and she was at her home. Now, he actually got 2 birds stoned at once going here, because Freeman McNeil was also there. Now, Constable Lamb said that he did nothing to make him suspect him of anything. Now, this little statement here by the officer was gathered up, and it was admitted as evidence, and the statement was signed by Freeman and the constable, so after they spoke, everything was recorded or whatever, right? Or documented, I should say. So, police then made a request to have everyone take polygraph tests. So they went to Freeman's mom's house, and a constable by the name of Gillis and Freeman sat in the police car for a little bit. Now, Freeman was willing to participate in this, and after some time it was decided that they would reschedule this for the next morning at 9 a.m. At 8:20 a.m., he was picked up by Gillis, and then they went to the North Sydney detachment, as that's where they had a polygraph facility located. Now, the polygraph operator was Philip Scharf. Now, the legalness of it all and how it worked were explained, and then consented upon. Now, the test was done, and Freeman failed. Kind of like he was, it seemed to the operator that he was trying to deceive him. Now, Freeman made no attempt to leave, even though the operator said that he could. So the whole test was documented and recorded. The pre-test, the post-test, the interviews, everything was recorded. Now, the polygraph suite, as they call it, consists of 2 rooms. One that contains the polygraph machine, the table it's placed on, and 2 chairs. They also have a concealed camera. Now, this is focused on the subject, as they are being advised beforehand that they will be videotaped and recorded and whatnot. And then it's recorded for like court documents and shit. And then there's the other test room there. Now, this one shows the polygraph test on the monitors, so it can be watched by police officers and officials and such. Now, Constable Gillis viewed this, and then he explained how the polygraph worked, and then read Freeman his rights. But even with taking the test, the Crown asked that neither the pre-test, the post-test, anything be admitted in evidence, because in this case it was clear like no threat or inducement of any kind was used for police to obtain the polygraph from Freeman, so he was therefore not asked to clear himself. So Sergeant Scharf spent considerable amount of time with Freeman. He kind of like established like a relationship of confidence, but that kind of changed when Freeman's test was over with, and then the officer blatantly like told Freeman that you failed the test. The polygraph exam had given him like a kind of a shocking experience, I guess. So the sergeant read him his charter rights, like previously stated here. So it just seemed that the sergeant who operated the polygraph went from an operator role to like a full-on investigator, which he wasn't supposed to do. Now, when Freeman failed the polygraph, he'd been vigorously confronted by that sergeant, and he was issued a warning from him, and it kind of like in like a monologue fucking kind of form, I guess. So he said, stating, "You gotta sit back and say, hey, can I carry this with me the rest of my life? Do I have to wait when police come with search warrants and scare my mom and my family or me, or do I have the courage to sit down and say, fellas, I can't let it go away, like go any further?" And now, this was like kind of maybe him suggesting to Freeman that if the polygraph is not taken, the investigation continues, or that his residence will be searched or shit like that, or the family will be arrested, right? Like, he kind of made it feel like a threat, I guess. Now, this is clearly an inducement or a threat that will result in the confession that was obtained through these means be rejected. So anything that Freeman would have said to him, he would have felt threatened by. So whatever he fucking said would have just been thrown out anyway. Although no confession had been obtained by Scharf in the post-polygraph interviews, everything there was inconsistent with previous statements from Freeman. So for those reasons alone, the polygraph statement was not admitted or referred to before the jury. Now, Freeman was interviewed over the course of the day. They offered him up some food, and they're just trying to keep his strength up. But he only picked at it. Now, around the 4:25 p.m. mark, Sergeant Scharf had entered the room, and then Freeman was continued questioned by Cleary and Gillis. Now, at this time, Freeman had become very distraught. He was pretty much crying with his head in his hands, because he was so concerned for his mother and girlfriend's safety. That's how fucking scared this guy was of that other guy, like the other officer and his threats and whatnot. And it was around that time when Freeman was asked by the sergeant, "How would you feel if your mother and girlfriend were hurt as a result of lack of truth?" Now, that wording there could have been totally characterized as a threat. During the course of the investigation and, everything going on back at McDonald's and whatnot, talking with Derek, talking with Freeman, Sergeant Scharf learned that the accomplices of Freeman's might have used firearms in the robbery. Now, this interview wasn't recorded or anything like that, but notes were taken, and this interview lasted about 12 minutes. But it kind of viewed Sergeant Scharf in a different light, I guess, than the other officers that were interviewing him, so it wasn't admitted into evidence. Now, a later investigation, Freeman asked for protection for his mother and his girlfriend. Now, one constable left the room, and he went out to go find out that the arrangements were already made by Scharf. Now, the police had asked him to reenact the route that he took the night in question. Now, at the end of this, the officers asked him, did he have anything further to add? Now, Freeman replied with, "If I think of anything, I'll contact you." To which Freeman kind of thought maybe that he was going home soon. So he pretty much thought the interview was over. A little later on, he asked to call a lawyer and his girlfriend's mom. This was mainly because of the officer's failure to allow him to go home. Now, officers supplied him with a telephone numbers, and a telephone book. So a telephone book is what you use to look up names and addresses and everything, and phone numbers. So this is what we used back in the day to call people if we didn't know their phone number. Now, while he was using the phone, he was in sight of the officers, but he was given privacy for these calls. Now, his lawyer, Arthur Mullen, was contacted, and he was spoke with by telephone. So at 10:17, he was taken back to the interview room, and this was around 10:38 p.m. when the lawyer arrived. Now, he spoke to the constables, and then he went in to see the constables at around 11 p.m. So, spending 40 minutes with Freeman as well, he then told Freeman that he should not say anything to police, not answer their questions, but to be cooperative. 12:30 a.m., May 16th. He was taken to the lockup room, and at this point, he was charged as an accessory to murder, and he was placed under arrest. So he was given blankets, and he slept until 2:35 a.m., until his mother and his sister arrived, and they visited him in private until 3:02 a.m. Now after this, he was observed every 15 minutes until 8:56 a.m. And then at that time, he was taken to the interview room, and he was read his rights again. Now, to that, he requested his lawyer. He was taken to a phone, and then given privacy. So the lawyer, Mullen, he obtained services over to David Ryan. Now, there was a conflict of interest in the case now, so he didn't want it. Now, this was a local lawyer, and he arrived at 9:46 a.m. He was given a brief update of the case by Constable Gillis there, and the lawyer stayed with Freeman until 11:35 a.m., and then he was given copies of the statements. He left at 11:40 a.m., and then he said he'd be back shortly. So 12:25 p.m., he came back with his shoes, a coat, and he delivered these items to Freeman's cell. Now, when the lawyer Ryan left, the constables told him that they would speak to the accused again. So at 12:55 p.m., Freeman was taken to the interview room with prepared notes. Now, this indicated about 30 points of evidence that had been made up to implicate the accused. Now, Constable Gillis went through each point with the accused, to which Freeman only advised them that he wouldn't say anything. Now, there were no notes taken during this, as there was no point, and although the version of Freeman's story differed this time around, Constable Gillis was reading the evidence against him. Freeman's refusal to say anything, and the officers kind of became abusive after this, kind of rude, kind of insulting, and Gillis had actually challenged the accused physically. Officer McDonald had to intervene here, so the interview was halted. Now, the conclusion of this was that Gillis did become angry, but he did not raise his voice or become violent in any way. So he literally pretty much just worked 30 hours fucking straight, so he was on edge, he was tired, he was frustrated, mainly due to Freeman's lack of cooperation. So he did call the accused a coward, and had insulted him. So the interview was terminated completely. There was no response from Freeman during that 2-hour period. Now, the Crown found the contents of this interview not admissible, and they did not seek admission of its contents. Now, 3 p.m. May 16th, Murphy and Cleary had arrived, and they interviewed him at around 3:33 p.m. Now, this was not videotaped or recorded, but notes were taken by Murphy, and then they would be put into evidence. Now, both officers kind of related to Freeman on a first-name basis here, so he was given his rights, and then Freeman wanted to see his lawyer again. The only thing said after police made sure that Freeman knew his rights were, "I know and understand my rights," said Freeman. Now, they took him to a telephone to call Mr. Ryan, his lawyer, in private. So he was then taken to the interview room and then asked if he was happy with the counsel given, to which he replied with, "Yes." Now, Corporal Murphy then read off the 6 charges, and then after they were read, Cleary leaned into Freeman and said, "We had 3 funerals. There may be one more. Are you proud of that?" And to this the accused kind of held back tears. He was about to break down. And then he said that he was advised to say nothing to them. But they told him his lawyer was with his family at that time, and that the accused would now have to decide what to do, which kind of undermined the accused's legal rights, kind of. So this was like a very perceptive way that they performed their duty. And then they kind of told a story about other youth offenders not being cooperative, and that they were given the maximum sentence. So the police told him that they knew everything, and they wanted his version of things. But he still intended to say nothing. But as soon as Cleary said to him, "And then you had a stick in your hand," I guess he meant the shovel or whatever with that. And then Freeman started crying. And then the interview kind of turned up a little bit there. So he spoke about the events of the crimes committed. So at 5:05 p.m., Cleary started a written form of statement. And he left to go get him some water so he could have a drink. And then he spoke to his lawyer. And the lawyer spoke to Freeman from 5:20 to 5:44 p.m. And after the lawyer left, police sat down with Freeman, and the accused gave a full and detailed statement. And he gave details that only the participant in the crimes could have known. And he even gave corrections while giving this statement, and then he initialized each page. So, in conclusion to this interview, the accused now actually showed them places where items were hidden. He gave details of the crime throughout the drive as well. So then Freeman had been kept at the correctional center from May 16th, and he was kept in isolation and nothing but his underwear. Now, May 18th, Gillis went there to go get him, and he wanted to get a supplemental statement and read him his charter rights. Now, the interview went quick, and it was found that the accused understood what those rights were, and he voluntarily chose to give additional facts. During the trip, Freeman told Cleary to take a certain route, so they ended up in Grantmire Brook. Now, this is where the other two had discarded the cash box, the shoes, the knives, everything else used in the crime. So they ended up on Beaton Road. Now, this is where police were shown where the ammo was hidden. There was a few spent bullet casings, and then they drove over to where there were 3 45-gallon drums located. Now, the drums have been used to burn, like, all the evidence, the clothes, the kit bag, everything else that the 3 had worn. And on the way back to the correctional center, he ended up showing officers where the car had been prior to the robbery. And then they arrived back at the center at 10:46 p.m. So everything was pretty much wrapping up here now, and with the community still in outrage over the crimes committed, Arlene McNeil was now on the mend, because she awoke from her coma, but she was now personally disabled, mentally and physically, for the rest of her life. Now, Jimmy Fagan, he'd now died from being shot in the head. Now, Derek Wood, Freeman McNeil, they were pretty much fucked because police figured it all out. They connected the dots through both Wood and McNeil's statements and interviews. Now, there was one loose end to tie up. So where was Derek Muse at? And it wasn't really long before they figured out his involvement anyway. Now, they would have gotten to him eventually, but with Derek and Freeman pretty much ratting each other out, that just made things a tad easier for police, and the investigation was now almost coming to an end. So, even the community was in the spotlight here, because it was time to now get the ones involved in the crime behind bars, and then they were going to round up Darren Muse. Now, the police wanted an interview with him, and they wanted to match up what his version of the story was against the other two boys, or what they told him. So, the next little bit, Darren Muse was now hauled in. So, this time, police were just tying up loose ends. Derek Woods actually signed a confession implicating everyone in the robbery, and now Muse just needed to tell his part. Darren Muse was now brought in for questioning. So police made it known to the public that they located a number of items that were used in the murder and robbery, and that were dumped by the three in the brook. Now, during questioning, Muse stated to police that he was innocent, but the statements from his robbery colleagues had stated otherwise, and they put him at the scene of the crime. Now, another key piece of info was was the fourth person that they had asked to do the robbery with them. That declined, and that man was named Greg Lawrence. Now, Sergeant Gary Grant was making arrangements to meet up with him, because his name had been brought up during questioning about the robbery and whatnot. So, the boys weren't really that fucking smart. Now, Greg Lawrence met up with the officer, but he didn't want to meet at the station. This was possibly because he was nervous or scared of the perpetrators. So, he wanted to meet up at the Holiday Inn in Sydney. But he did take precautions. He drove to the Sydney shopping center, and then parked his car, and then he took a cab to the hotel, and he met with the officer. Now, Greg Lawrence told him all his knowledge of what he knew. So, he was asked to join the robbery, which indicated Freeman McNeil had controlled the conversation. He'd also seen a small silver gun in his trunk. Now, that would be the .22 caliber pistol. Now, the officer seemed kind of shocked to learn that the robbery was planned a week before it had happened, but was canceled when the fourth person decided not to show up to participate. And then when Greg was asked to partake, he declined, and he didn't think that they would go through with the ordeal. Within 10 days of the robbery, Derek Wood, Freeman McNeil, and Darren Muse were now arrested, and they had a shit ton of preliminary hearings to go through, and in the meantime it was on to their big old court dates. Now, the 1-year anniversary of the crimes were approaching, and Derek Wood had been tried first. That began May of 1993. Wood was found guilty of the attempted murder of Arlene McNeil, first-degree murders of Donna Warren and Neil Burrows, as well as some other charges for the robbery and unlawful confinement, and he was actually given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Next up, Darren Muse. This was June 1993. He pled guilty to second-degree murder of Neil Burrows, and then to the robbery and some other charges. Now, there were a couple charges that were dismissed as part of a plea bargain. Now, he ended up making a plea bargain with prosecutors. He was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 20 years. And last of the Three Stooges, folks, Freeman McNeil. So, his court date was September 1993. He was convicted of the first-degree murder of Neil Burrows, the second-degree murder of Jimmy Fagan, and the robbery. He was given a life sentence with no parole for 25 years. And now they had some time to think about their actions in jail. So, some justice was served to the families. Now, back a few years, this would have been 2015, Derek Wood had applied for parole, but he was denied for parole by the Parole Board of Canada. Now, Darren Muse was granted full parole in 2012. He was then released from prison, but pretty much banned from Sydney, Nova Scotia. I mean, the community was pissed. They couldn't have been staying in the area due to fear for his safety. He'd also been banned from Sydney's surrounding areas, including Sydney River. Now, the judge recapped on these crimes, stating, quote, "The murders were clearly callous and horrific. The crimes were characterized by a rare level of brutality and indifference towards the victims." So this case was all just said and done now. But I mean, it was just a horrific fucking robbery. And even Muse had a couple other conditions besides not being allowed to return to the Sydney area. He's to have no contact with the families of the victims, and to abstain from alcohol and drugs. Freeman McNeil, this was as of 2022. He's been granted day parole, and in a recent decision, the Parole Board of Canada says McNeil has a low to moderate likelihood of committing another violent crime. So they've kind of been easing him back into society, and Freeman has been allowed out of prison for unescorted day trips once a month. So this has been since 2017. And even though he played a crucial role in the incident for supplying the handgun and the escape vehicle and everything, to this day he still denies providing the gun for the robbery. Now, during this time in prison there, he's been doing counseling. So he's made chances for social success. And they're viewed as positive by the parole board and everything. Now, the board granted him day parole for 6 months on conditions that he stay out of Nova Scotia. Now, Derek Wood, he was denied parole after the parole board decided that he was a high risk to reoffend. And why wouldn't they think that? I mean, looking back at all the horrific shit that he did during the robbery. And so, 2 out of 3 are out of jail now. And every year around this time, Neil's sister, Kathy Burrows, she gets very emotional around this time of year, saying, quote, "It's tattooed on my soul for the rest of my life. It has changed me. And I don't have my best friend around anymore." And she wasn't the only one impacted by this. Her mother and father were fucking devastated by this. "It shattered all of us," she said. And the survivor of this ordeal there, Arlene, she passed away some years ago later at the age of 46. And this was on August 15th, 2018. Now, the robbery left her with a lot of intellectual disabilities, and she moved into a facility located in Bridgewater for about 23 years. Now, the time before her death, although she was ill, her death was totally unexpected and was a surprise to the community. She's buried in Resurrection Cemetery in Sydney Forks. And that's it, folks. I think I covered everything. I really hope I did this fucking properly. So, I went through a ton of articles about this for fucking days, so some of it's pretty graphic, and, it's something that happened around my hometown, so it needed to be covered. So, I'd like to thank my buddy Liam for giving me this fucking case to cover, you fuck. So, thanks for tuning back into Twisted Tales, folks. I'll be back with something else here. I'm sure, life's just been busy as shit here lately, so thanks for being patient, and, thanks for tuning back in, guys. Take her easy.
One of the men convicted in one of the most shocking crimes in Nova Scotia's history has been granted day parole. Freeman McNeil received a life sentence for his involvement in the 1992 McDonald's murders. For one of the victims' families, the decision brings it all back.
30 years later, and the painful feelings of May 7th, 1992 have returned for Kathy Burrows. Her brother Neil was one of 3 employees killed and a 4th left critically injured at the McDonald's in Sydney River. It was an armed robbery turned deadly.
All 4 of these victims were victims of gunshots at close range to the head area.
On January 4th, one of the men convicted, Freeman McNeil, will be granted full day parole.
I'm not happy with it. There's 2 of them now walking, going to be out and free and having a life. I know 4 individuals that probably would have loved to have spent the last 30 years here with their families.
Burrows says she was told over the phone by a parole board spokesperson that McNeil has a low to moderate likelihood of committing another violent crime and will be released to a halfway house and then eventually to his wife in Montreal.
Neil would have had a good life if he had been allowed to live and people didn't think that his life meant nothing or his... It's just disheartening.
Derek Wood and Freeman McNeil were both charged and convicted of first-degree murder. The third suspect, Darren Muse, avoided trial and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Muse is now free, while Wood, who remains locked up, is the only one of the 3 Burrows says has shown remorse.
Anything that they do, it has to be... The families have to be notified. So if it's the only thing that lets them know that I'm still here and I haven't forgotten, I'm okay with that too.
Took my brother's life, okay? But he's allowed, all 3 of them are allowed.
It was a day when the emotional dam broke for family members of murder victim Neil Burrows. Anger was expressed that Darren Muse was getting off lightly after pleading guilty to the second-degree murder of Burrows. The outburst by Burrows' widow, his mother, and brothers was directed against the Crown, the defense, and later the media. It came after the judge denied acceptance of victim impact statements from family members of all 4 victims of the crime. Burroughs' widow and his sister expected they would be giving their statements directly to the judge.
That's not fair to us. That was my son. And he got the worst out of it. And what are they getting? Nothing. After all, we lost him just as much yourself. After lost his son, her son. And don't look and laugh at me. You fat prick. Big fat motherfucker. That's all you are. I'm going to see you to the Christmas dinner, buddy, and I'm going to give it to him. He has no privacy in this whole thing. No privacy. We've got cameras stuck in our face, microphones. I don't care. I'm fed up with the media. Fed up.
It's not that it was not unexpected. I'm not quite sure as to why members of the Burroughs family are upset, mainly because their victim impact statements are in fact getting before the trial judge, and they will be able to read what, in fact, they've written in those statements. They may be that they are upset because, number one, they cannot give evidence, but the law does not allow for it. And number two, they may be upset because other members of other families cannot testify, but the law just does not provide for it. So therefore, it appears that they're a little upset about it.
Earlier, the courtroom heard a statement given to police by Muse in which he outlined his role in the McDonald's incident and cutting Burroughs' throat. He described seeing Burroughs lying in a pool of blood, not dead, and said, "I felt for him. I knew where the jugular vein was, so I went over and cut him." Muse also said, "I will take blame for robbery, but I'm glad people know I'm not a shooter." The trial resumes tomorrow, with the Crown continuing its efforts to have Muse sentenced to 25 years in prison without opportunity for parole.
A lone survivor in one of Cape Breton's most notorious crimes has died. Arlene McNeil was shot in the head during an armed robbery at McDonald's in Sydney River back in 1992. That left her permanently disabled. She died Wednesday in Halifax following an illness. And her death has brought back some emotional memories for one of the victim's family members.
Described by family as a lover of country music, the queen of crazy eights who enjoyed long walks in her wheelchair, 46-year-old Arlene McNeil is being remembered as a person who had a positive outlook on life despite what she had to overcome.
I'm sure it's not the life that Arlene or her family thought that she would have, and it's just so very sad that 3 individuals decided what her life would be.
McNeil was just 20 when she was shot in the head and left disabled after 3 men broke into this McDonald's in Sydney River in May of 1992. 3 other employees were murdered in the botched robbery. Kathy Burroughs' brother, Neil, was one of the victims. She says Arlene's death has brought it all back.
I was very emotional when I heard that she had passed, because we know the pain that her mother, her family, her friends are going through, and they have lived with it, almost 27 years.
Good morning. We're
Morning, how are you?
for the Arlene McNeil Trust Fund. Would you like to make a
Expecting you,
donation?
yes, for a very good cause.
Shortly after the terrible crime, the community rallied behind the McNeil family, raising more than $100,000 for her long-term care. Arlene's mother spoke about her daughter's aspirations in life and dreams she had, which were abruptly taken away.
She was determined that she was going to go through university, get her degree. And she had a steady boyfriend, and they were talking about after she finishes her education, she was going to get married and have children. She always told me she wanted 2 children, a boy and a girl. And that's all taken away.
For most of her life, Arlene lived at a facility in Bridgewater where she received specialized care. Her family says she died Wednesday at the Halifax Infirmary. After all these years, Burroughs remains angry and upset with the three men responsible for the crime. Derek Wood and Freeman McNeil remain behind bars, but Darren Muse was granted parole for good behavior and is living his life in British Columbia. Burroughs feels they should all die in prison.
Right now, it's just all about Arlene and her family, and her journey is over. And actually, the first thing that I thought of is that the four of them are together again.
Now, Kathy Burroughs says she will be attending the funeral for Arlene because her brother Neil would want her to. She feels all four of the victims' families are linked to this one incident. The funeral, meanwhile, will be held for Arlene on Tuesday at St. Joseph's Church in her home community of Little Brador.
Twisted Tales.